about kind of step 2. All right. So let's say we've got our animation. We like it so far, but we want to have something else happen to this. And in order to do that, we need to make our project a little bit longer, and so we can continue on the timeline to add more animations. So what I'm going to do is just, let's see, I'm good. I'm still recording, so that's good. And I'm just going to add a cube in here, and I'm going to treat this like a brick wall. So I want this ball to kind of hit a brick wall and have a action kind of reaction, right? So it's rolling around, hits the wall, and then bounces back, right? So I'm just going to create this wall quickly, something like this. And let's just give this brick texture. And then that's pretty good for now. And then I'm just going to move my lighting a little bit. I feel like this is going to be in shadow. No? Yeah, a little bit in shadow. So let's do the lighting over here more. That's a little bit better. Okay. So what I want to have happen next is I want to have the ball hit the wall, kind of bounce back and land and stop. All right. So, and this gets into a little bit more complex sort of animating and thinking about some of those principles that we looked at on the video. So what I'll do first is make my timeline longer. So in order to do that, down here you have 0 frames, you have 90 frames at the end. You can simply add time onto the end here. So I'm going to make this 180 instead of 90. And you'll notice that you also have this slider. This kind of goes across the timeline, so you can zoom into a certain area, or you can drag it out all the way so you see the entire composition. So now we have 0 to 180, and that's reflected in our timeline down here. So where are we left off? I have to click on the sphere because that's where I had my keyframes attached to it, right? So notice when I'm outside of that, you don't see the keyframes anymore. So remember that whenever we're animating, we have to animate the active objects, and that is the sphere. Okay, so what I want to do, this is going to roll forward, and I want it to hit the wall, kind of squish a little bit, and then bounce back. So I'm going to go to, I'm actually going to work from the right side to fine tune this a little bit. Let's see. So far, got this rolling in here. It almost hits the wall. I guess it does hit the wall. So we should move the wall back a little bit. Let's do that. Move the wall back a little bit. Okay. Now, if this were to hit the wall, when it hits, it's likely going to squish and condense, right? We kind of like squash and stretch is one of those principles of animation. So what I'm going to do is I was at frame 90 right here. I'm going to move forward to like I don't know, let's just move forward like 10 frames. So now we're at frame 100, and I'm just going to move the ball over as though it would hit the wall. Okay, and then I'm going to change its form. So I'm going to squish it down. It's hitting the wall. And remember in the video, I talked a little bit about the idea that if something compresses, it's going to elongate it in a different sort of way. And so proportionally, it would also have to grow a little bit in order for it to give that kind of quality. And I don't want it to go below my floor, so I'm going to bring this up a little bit so it still remains kind of on the floor. And then I'm at the keyframe. So now I've got this motion where the ball comes in, and hits the wall and squishes, okay? So now I have to think a little bit about how this would, it's compressed and then it gets released again. So from here, I like to just kind of work in increments to start, because what you can do is you can always move your keyframes around once the animation is recorded, right? So if I wanted this whole thing to move faster, I could take all these keyframes and compress it down to like 40 frames instead of 90 frames. And that means the whole thing is going to run faster. So I kind of like to work slower to begin with so I can really see the motions, and then speed it up later to get the effective quality of timing and movement, right? So what I imagined is that this ball would hit and squish, and then it would probably like flip back on itself a little bit, right? So it would come out this way. It would probably rise up a little bit, give itself a little bit of loft. It would return to its shape. So I would say we return it to 200 by 200, okay? And it would probably come up a little bit, and I think it would definitely like rotate back, right? It would kind of like spin back on itself a little bit. So I'm just gonna rotate this a little bit. I'm gonna hit the keyframe. Oh, sorry. I didn't move forward in the timeline. Rookie mistake every time. So let's do that again. We're gonna change the position up here, right? We're gonna go back to 200. Okay, there we are. We're gonna hit keyframe in, and now we've got this kind of bounce back motion. Let's see what that looks like from here. So it's rolling in, hits, bounces up. All right, and then I think I also need it to roll back a little bit. Let's go to 110, and let's roll this back. Remember, always go to your keyframes. Even though you might be forward ahead, you don't want to add a bunch of new keyframes. So try to keep your keyframes down to a minimal. Hit this record button again. Let's move back here and watch it. Not too bad. That was a really fast movement to here. So I might want to move that back, but I can always adjust these things later. Now, after it bounces, it's probably going to loft out a little bit farther, continue to rotate, and then drop. So I'm going to take this position. I'm going to go from 110 to, let's say, 130. I'm going to go 20 frames ahead this time. I'm going to move this out, maybe a little bit higher. And then I'm going to rotate it back a little bit more. Okay. Keyframe that. And let's see what that looks like. So I'm going ahead, bouncing, spinning, not too bad. All right, and finally, I'm going to go 20 frames further to 150. And I'm going to bring this forward. I'm going to bring it down to right about here, slightly above the floor. And I'll explain that in a minute. So then I'm going to rotate this a little bit further. I'm going to keyframe this. And let's just see what that looks like. So hits the wall, bounces, spins back and down. Okay, so here's the thing. What I want to do is I want to have this hit the floor and squish and then return its shape again, kind of giving them that sense of elasticity. So the reason that I stopped just above the floor is because whenever you're animating between motions, movements, or scale, right? In between the keyframes is something called interpolation, meaning it's trying to go from one position to another position, and it's adding dotted lines all along the way, or it's trying to go from a small scale to a large scale and adding those sort of slow changes in between. What I don't want to happen is that I don't want this to change shape from this point, because it's still in the air, to the ground. I want it to have a very quick transition right before it hits the ground to squish down into its shape, right? So what I'm going to do next is, let's see, where was I? I was at 150. I'm just going to move forward a couple of frames. There's a, next to the play button is this go to next frame button, and you can just scrub forward a couple of, I'm just going to go like maybe 3. And then I'm going to bring this down, right, and forward, okay? And I'm going to rotate this, oops, so it's facing up. Okay, that'll be a little bit easier. And then I'm going to squish it down. So I'm going to squish this down. Remember, if you squish down, you also have to squish out. Okay, and then I'm going to bring this down, hitting the ground here, out, like that, and keyframe there. So this way, you should have this coming down and squishing, right? So it changes shape between that very short distance, and it looks more believable. Okay, and then from here, I'll go to frame, I don't know, 60, and I will return it to its original shape, 200, 200, And then I'm going to bring it up. Okay, so it should be there. And then move it forward just a little bit and keyframe that. All right, so let's see how this motion happens now as it rolls in, hits the wall, bounces out. Okay, and if we look at it in perspective, we're a little bit in reverse, but that's okay. We got this thing rolling in, shrinking down, hitting the wall, and returning its form. Okay, so not too bad. You know, there's a lot of things that we can tweak and change and adjust along the way. But this definitely gives us a more realistic sense of that action, reaction, and sense of gravity and elasticity. All right. So let me just see, does anybody have questions about that? All right, so far, any thumbs up if we're good? All right, thank you. Okay, so let's go a little bit further with this. So I'd say whenever you're animating, it's always good, again, to kind of not do too many keyframes. You want to try to minimize your keyframes. It's sort of like when you're drawing in Illustrator, you want to try to trace, like if you're doing a trace or you're making a shape, you want to have as few points as possible to get those arcs and curves as smooth as possible, right? And so if there's too many keyframes, your eye will notice there'll be like a really kind of jagged sense of movement. And so we want to try to avoid that. So fewer keyframes is better. And then what I want to talk about now is how to control timing, because timing is really everything, right? It's about using the 12 principles to really show how things act, interact, react, those sort of ideas. But then also timing becomes a really important part of that. And so we need to tweak those controls further. So let's talk about that. So if I go to layouts, right? And if I go to the Animate layout, this is going to give you a different format that really highlights the timeline in a different way. So this is something called the dope sheet. And the dope sheet has all of the movements, the position, the scale, the rotation of everything that you've done. And each one of these sets of bars is a keyframe that we've put in place, okay? And the great thing about this is that you can make adjustments along the way. So if you watch this, it's going across, it's hitting, it's bouncing. It's almost like it's kind of a bit too slow motion towards the end there. So what I can do is I can highlight, let's say here, this is frame 90. So this whole group of frames, let's say if we wanted to have this happen quicker, what you can do is you can drag outside of here, you can just select that group of keyframes, and then it's going to highlight on the top bar here, you'll see that there's the major keyframe to start and the end keyframe. And what you can do is you can actually compress that. So if I click and grab this, I can drag it down and it's compressing all of that time. And what that's going to mean is that we can make this go faster, right? So now if we watch this, it's going to come in and hit that and bounce a little bit faster, which might be more sort of realistic overall. So again, I can shrink this down even more. Let's go to like 120 and see what that looks like. And we can preview that. Too much, right? I think it's like overall, the whole thing is too fast at the end. I like the overall, I like the fastness, just not the beginning of it. I'm gonna bring this back to 140 because I feel like that was kind of closer to an overall movement. So let's watch that again. The speed kind of is important here. I feel like there's a consistent speed so far. I mean, I could tweak a few things, but what I might want to do here now is just click summary. So this, if you click summary, it's going to highlight everything all together. And I might just take this whole thing now and ramp this down to make it faster. So let's see what happens if we do this within 90 frames, see what that looks like. it feels better. It's still slow in the middle. So I think that overall it's kind of like, it's kind of too long of an entry almost. So how do we adjust that? Well, we could, let's see, move these frames. Let's try this. From here. Okay, and we're going to drag this way. Drag this down. That's a little faster. And then we also have to move these guys this way. Actually, that's not what I want to do. What I want to do here is start to move these as a group. So if I grab this, if I click in the middle, I can move them all. So I don't change I don't compress it any. I'm just bringing it closer. So let's see what this looks like. Oops. It's a little better. But here's the minutia of everything, right? Like this is where you really have to go in and kind of like adjust and tweak. You can always undo what you've done. Let's see, I think we moved that a little bit, compressed it a little bit too much. So, you know, maybe I just do a little bit here. And so again, this is where the timeline becomes really important to sort of adjust and kind of tweak and make it closer to what you really think is coming through. All right, so that's working with a timeline. Again, you can move individual keyframes here. If I click on just one section, I can drag and move that. Whoops, sorry, highlight it. I can drag and move that. I could even get rid of it. Let's see if I delete that. All right, so if I delete it, then I have more. That looks better. I think that grow and shrink was not good for our overall project. The other thing is that, you know, I've made this whole thing shorter now. So what I can do is I could change this back here. I could make it back down to 90. Okay. That's going to end my sequence. All right. So here again, I've got my 90 frames, rolls in, hits the wall, bounces back, and stops. What I do want you to pay attention to is the end. Folks often have difficulty with the ending of things. They want to just end it as quick as possible. And you notice that it flicks back to the beginning way too fast. So you want to give the viewer a chance, I would say like a 3-second pause when you're ending something, at least. All right, so let's do that. Make this 120 instead of 90. For the ending, that's more than that, but let's watch this through. So it rolls in, bounces, and stops. And we get a little bit more. Oh, that didn't work. I have to drag this out here. See that? Now it's 120. Okay, finally, rolls in, bounces, stops, and rests, and we can kind of view it for a second, right? Just that little bit of pause sometimes can be a really big deal. Okay, so that in a nutshell is working with the basics of animation, right?